So it's my great pleasure now to introduce our speaker for today. It's Neil Seeman. He's the founder and chief executive officer of RIWI Corp. It's a global trend tracking, risk monitoring, and prediction technology firm. His work seeks to collect a unique stream of individual, community-based, and countrywide sentiment or opinion data from more than 200 countries and territories for groups like the UN World Food Program, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, USAID, World Bank. So he's global in its reach and high impact work. He's been working with U of T as well as other leading research universities to collect public health opinion and sentiment data. In his previous work, he was involved in tracking the effectiveness of public health communications around the globe. He comes with a public health and law background, and his lecture couldn't come at a better time. He's agreed to modify somewhat in order to address the current crisis that we're in, and it's extremely timely in order to understand how do we track something that's happening so quickly with the new data streams and new technologies. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Neil, who's going to be speaking today in our lecture series. And I encourage everyone to pay close attention and keep your questions recorded, and then we'll have lots of time to take them at the end. So over to you, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the NAO and the university for extending this invitation to me and for enabling this talk by webinar. I want to thank all the frontline workers, all the hard-working people at the Dalalana School of Public Health, and everyone in Ontario and around the world who are working so very hard and very creatively and in coordination to alleviate this, the human health distress of COVID. I'll be speaking more about the concept of gratitude later in this presentation. I'd like to disclose a competing interest, as I will be discussing findings from our company, which, although in the public domain and prepared by us for the purposes of public dissemination, can nonetheless be seen as promoting the publicly traded company of which I am founder and CEO. So in this context, I should also note that our company is in a multi-year agreement with the University of Toronto for global digital surveys that are frequently leveraged by different faculty research units. We are funded by retail and institutional investors and by myself personally. So hearing from quiet voices, today I'll be speaking about the importance of quiet voices in the context of COVID-19 in particular. In public health and health systems research, these voices sometimes go by the phrase underrepresented voices or communities. At our data company, very specifically, we define quiet voices a little bit differently. When we talk about quiet voices, we're talking here about people who rarely post opinions online, rarely participate in in-person surveys and phone surveys or in regular online surveys. So to be clear, these quiet voices are people who are online, have web access in any nation or territory of the world, but their voice is not heard in the data or survey instruments policymakers often use to inform policy when they collect information, for example, on the self-reported prevalence of symptomatology of COVID-19, or about the prevalence of physical distancing in different parts of Canada or different parts of India or China or Iran or anywhere. So our company, RIWI, which stands for Real-Time Interactive Worldwide Intelligence, was actually conceived during a pandemic, H1N1. Prior to our commercialization, we worked out of Massey College office in Toronto to deploy what were then algorithms, not yet patented, of how to collect a reliable and continuous evidence stream showing which areas of the world were protecting themselves best against H1N1 by practicing proper hygiene and following emergency preparedness protocols. And I remember well, some of our biggest champions, passionate back then, were infectious disease and public health security experts from around the world who learned about our research from academic journals and then educated me about global data gaps. Prior to H1N1, I'd invented this web-based process now called random domain intercept technology, which was once considered heterodox, it is still by some, and I thank you for those contrarians. But it's now pretty widely accepted as a rigorous privacy compliant and machine learning global technology platform to extract a continuous random representative online survey response stream from people who interact with the internet. So we solicit opinion and message reaction data from all types of people as they type or click into non-trademarked web domains that are not in active commercial use anywhere in the world. So we've thus far, to give you a sense of scale, collected more than 1.6 billion sets of response data from 229 countries or territories. So epidemiologists taught me in 2011 that these big data, were interesting, but not the gem. It was the nature of the data that mattered. We had discovered a new beacon to predict, track, and monitor abrupt change in any country, which led us to monitor the abrupt fall of the Mubarak regime in February 2011. So today, we focus on collecting sentiment, which is what people dynamically think, feel, and observe. People who had modeled the Zika epidemic, and in fact, they were at Dalalana, taught me that this fast-changing sentiment is called the X factor in any outbreak, since it is very hard or next to impossible to work into a disease forecast model. In part, since we learn that everyone reacts differently to news of new outbreaks, and the nature of the medium, to borrow a phrase, can thereafter affect the seriousness and manner with which we absorb the message from policymakers about how we should and how we do react. So gratitude. I've thanked NAO. I thanked the University of Toronto. For those of you like myself who have been engaged in the web since the early days of social communications, you'll remember that thanking people for comments on group chat as opposed to posting angry vitriol online was actually, believe it or not, common practice in the early days of alt news groups back in the 1990s. We talked actually a lot about sensitive topics like mental health stigma or HIV/AIDS openly and honestly. Things have changed as we all move more and more into our echo chambers, which is all the more reason I feel we need to hear from outside of those echo chambers and outside of partisan news reports online when we want to understand people's authentic perceptions and observations. So what are quiet leaders? By quiet leaders, I'm referring to all of us, all of you. All of us have an equal moral and leadership value, and that includes people at all lines of defense and offense of this pandemic. So for both our frontline workers to everyone engaged in learning and practicing and proposing new constructive ideas, I thank you. As public health in particular teaches, I think, leaders at any level of any organization or community all have the unique ability to make a difference, whether it's building a new open data set, providing healthcare, helping a neighbor, or setting examples of how to act. So thank you. I also want to thank our data iconoclasts, of which there are many, well-known and lesser known. One thing that's interesting to me about this inspiring quotation from Paul Samuelson, the late Nobel laureate in economic sciences from MIT, is that it's wrongly attributed to the economist John Maynard Keynes in a lot of places on the web. And in a 1970 interview with Meet the Press, when Professor Samuelson says that he is in the process of, confronting these persistent demands from the media about the precise rate of inflation that is necessary to promote growth after system shocks, like the Second World War. And in different editions of his seminal textbooks, as evidence changed, Professor Samuelson changed his view from sort of 3% to 4% to 5%. New information about system shocks and impacts and policy solutions had the effect of changing his view. In another interview later, 8 years later, Dr. Samuelson, in defending another policy position, he mistakenly attributed the same statement he used in 1978 to a fellow data iconoclast, John Maynard Keynes, so hence the confusion. So changing one's mind, I want to emphasize, like Samuelson did, it's not the hallmark of irrationality. It's the opposite. It's necessary when a situation and facts change. It's also necessary when we see success from a jurisdiction or a health system with a different set of protocols and laws and different understanding, perhaps, of civil liberties and public health. So We know that China was heavily criticized in the Western media for being slow to acknowledge the virus's spread early on, and criticized further for imposing what appeared to many to be draconian measures. But it has verified its success controlling the first wave of the disease, while countries in the West struggle to get infections under control. General lockdowns are not enough, Chinese officials now say. What really turned the tide in Hubei, we're now told, was an evidence-based shift to a more aggressive and systematic quarantine regime, whereby suspected or mild cases were sent to makeshift hospitals and temporary quarantine centers. So I want to draw this analogy because, you know, like many of the critics today in the media, Samuelson's media critics wanted policy consistency on what the precise formula is for any crisis. When during crises, you know, facts change. And Samuelson also changed his views when he learned from other countries that were going through system shocks. And I think it's fair to say that our public health leaders in Ontario and in Canada are doing as they should, and learning from other jurisdictions as we move through stages of the pandemic. So big data solutions to solve wicked problems. You know, we often in the Valley, in startup land, in the media and in academia, we throw around words like machine learning and artificial intelligence in today's world of big data. And at RIWI, we also use machine learning algorithms, no doubt, which are a form of AI in understanding how to reach as broad a representation of the online population as possible when we collect sentiment. And you've no doubt heard about manifestations of big data that use what are called natural learning processes to scrape what people may be saying on Twitter or social media or on Wikipedia, or even what's recently come out recently from Israel and other places, contact tracing using cell phone location data. But I need to emphasize and be really straight up here. You know, we're only at the very primitive stages of AI. And most of what we call AI hinges today on a common and deeply limited understanding of truth and facts. That quote I noted earlier from Paul Samuelson is widely attributed on authoritative websites and in authoritative media and sources to John Maynard Keynes. And a sophisticated AI tool might therefore wrongly attribute this quote to Keynes, not Samuelson. And so these tools, AI, machine learning, and big data, they're only as strong as the common understanding of truth from which we pull. So, and also let it be said, you know, I put it in brackets in this slide, that privacy is not a footnote in the collection of data. The vast majority of people in the global data sphere, that is people like me who collect data and celebrate the power of data to inform public policy decisions, agree with this. Data are only as powerful as their privacy compliance. Just like our public health officials, we need to trust our data collectors and how they use our data downstream and upstream if we're going to have faith in the government and the public and the private sector to address this pandemic. So in the case of public opinion and sentiment, we at our company and the amazing people we have are trying to contribute as much as possible to gathering truth-based sentiment anywhere in the world, especially in closed and monitored societies of the world, but also in dynamic information environments like the United States, the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, and Canada. So China exposure, you know, as I noted, RIWI and our partners, we specialize in collecting data in heavily monitored societies as well as less monitored societies. Other sentiment data sources in China typically tell you what habitual survey responders think. And these are people who answer surveys all day, often for cash or rewards. And they all come from very select cities in China. And these episodic surveys require people to provide their names and contact information, which can potentially be breached or sold to third parties without the consent of the data provider, that being the individual. And so this slide is representative of the typical spread of responses that we might see. And this is different than other sentiment data collection across China. I guess what makes it different, a few things. It's obviously broad-based, urban and rural, real time. The self-reported data are anonymous. We hear from ordinary citizens, not the outliers who sign up for surveys. We reach young people, for instance, who almost never answer surveys. And we do this through truly anonymous data collection using machine learning, which can reach anyone on the web 24/7. We expose random members of the Chinese population to a continuous RIWI survey or public health message test. We can apply a regular time series, which is so critical to policy impact measurement. This gives us an ability to cut through the noise and hype to see what people are in fact doing and observing. And while it is true that Chinese citizens are wary of endorsing anything negative potentially about their government, even when asked anonymously, RIWI has shown that compared to other in-market sentiment collection sources, which are lagging, it can actually obtain accurate real-time views and opinions. And we have ways of testing replicability and other aspects of data integrity, which I'm happy to speak to in the questions. I just want to speak a little bit more about non-habitual survey takers, and this is important to data quality not only in China, but in any region in the world. One of the hidden secrets of traditional polling that you may see reported on a day-to-day basis is that people who answer surveys do so frequently. Many studies show that some persons answer dozens of surveys a day in order to earn cash or other rewards. This is one of the reasons why, contrary to legacy polling systems, RIWI was able to successfully predict the US 2016 presidential election and the popular vote for Secretary Clinton. We listened to quiet voices, and so in 2016, it was the 18 to 34-year-old men in the US Rust Belt in 2016 who hadn't broadcast their feelings until they were at the ballot box. And so what you see here on this slide is just that representation of quiet voices who broadcast their feelings and observations to us in China. And this, again, is reflected in other countries to varying degrees around the world. So one power of our technology is that we reach these non-typical respondents, and this matters to us considerably to ensure quiet voices are being heard. So to the data right now that matter, community confidence in China during COVID. This is the share who are confident in Chinese health officials' ability to educate the public, and you see that in the line going upward, and then the Johns Hopkins case data in blue underneath. Trust is essential in ensuring that people take proper protective actions in an emergency. So this slide represents approximately 30,000 people in China from January until now. In China, our data have represented a very powerful direct correlation between a rise in cases and a dip in confidence in public health leadership, and vice versa, a rise in confidence coming with decreased cases as reported by Johns Hopkins. So this speaks, we feel, to the face validity of the ongoing survey collection and potentially as well to the efficacy of China's comprehensive approach to containing their first wave of the COVID-19 epidemic there. And trust in authority dictates, we feel, whether or not people will take the necessary measures to protect themselves and, by extension, their community. So slide 9, in China and in all other countries, people express to us on the RIWI platform views about the future and how the future may change. We call them RIWI predictors. The percentage of people who believe things will improve in China, clearly you see, is growing. And when people believe things will improve, they place ever greater confidence in public health officials and are more willing to follow guidance on testing, for example, or physical distancing. This connects to the more important concept of expectations theory, to which I will return. So economic resilience in China, a really important topic now is just the interconnection between economic resilience and health system resilience. So this is focused on China. Economic activity dropped dramatically during the first wave of the epidemic in China, but at the same time, since confidence and optimism did not drop nearly as dramatically, economic activity appears to be coming back to pre-outbreak levels in some areas. So this is instructive for other jurisdictions, and as has been made clear in this pandemic, it's difficult to assess just how deeply and in what sequence public health data are interwoven with economic resilience data. A major problem impacting the effectiveness of government and industry policies is the time lag inherent in the transmission of data. Confirmed COVID-19 cases reflect the state of infectivity days, sometimes weeks prior to their being officially reported. At the same time, we have this challenge in economic data. Official economic data are not reported until weeks and often months after the actual changes, and this is not unique to China. Just move on a little bit more about economic resilience, because it really is an important topic now and twinned with public health resilience. So we see here that confidence levels actually in China are not that far off from the same last year in China. So the question is this predictive of a sharp uptick in that country's economy? We don't know yet. Outside of the context of a pandemic, RIWI data about economic confidence in real time has been shown in that country to be predictive of critical headline economic indicators, such as employment data or manufacturing. A pandemic, however, with multiple potential waves of infection and uncertainty and supply chain disruption is, of course, categorically different from normal economic times. So we need to dig deeper into this analysis over time, and we all need to learn from it. Physical distancing, as we've heard in recent Dalai Lama talks and elsewhere, the general theory is that physical distancing is predictive of health system preparedness, and if adhered to, will flatten the incidence curve or rate of new infections. We are accumulating more data on this topic every day, increasing countries as well, and trying to dig into cultural and other factors that may affect how people interpret what physical distancing means and how feasible it is. In each bar, the shorter the length of the horizontal bar, total bar, means that there's a greater percentage always practicing distancing. In China now, there is a greater proportion than in many other countries always distancing. This can possibly be explained by the late stage they are in the epidemic now. The messaging has been clear, or perhaps simply more entrenched at this later stage of the epidemic. India registers the most to report they are always physically distancing in the context of the epidemic there. India data I'll return to shortly, since we have been focusing in on India since its announcement this week of a strict 21-day lockdown. In all these bars, notably Iran, we are trying to understand nuance and contextual factors that may be affecting the data. Age cohorts and physical distancing. So older people are more scared, as certain of our data suggest. A greater proportion are saying that they are always physically distancing, but these, as you know, are vast generalizations, different by geographic area and dynamic. There are many age cohort generalizations that I feel are surfacing in the media that often are in fact in contrast to what we know to be true. So for example, in Canada, we know from earlier research that young people are in fact very willing and eager to act upon opportunities to help frail elderly and neighbors in their communities during times of challenge. So we must be careful not to generalize from these early cohort observations. So here in this graph, what we're trying to do is dig into understanding how people in the 14 to 24-year-old cohort in particular in North America conduct themselves. While at lower risk of serious consequences, they are potential virus transmitters, and their understanding, we feel, is a good proxy for how effective public health messages may be resonating. Physical distancing. So this is where we get further into the concern that has gripped policymakers in North America. Even though we have, and I personally know, many stellar corporate leaders being intensely assertive with ensuring all their workers are safe and abiding by physical distancing policies and speaking with a clear, consistent voice. The reality is that we have many businesses where employees feel actual or implicit pressure to forego physical distancing guidelines. This pressure, we're finding, disproportionately falls on vulnerable workers without secure sick leave or insurance, and on so-called gig economy workers, a major and growing proportion of the North American economy. Evolving government policies that we're hearing about now may change this. I'm very optimistic about this. The entire gig economy, sharing economy, and much of Silicon Valley and New York City now, which is obviously in heightened concern, and fast-growing gig subsectors like part-time personal and life coaching have been very economically dependent on high-touch interactivity business, whether it's about technology and app-enabled delivery of food, or fix-it workers coming into your home, Uber drivers, shared workplaces, or Airbnb. Sick leave, a little bit more about that. Here we see a slide noting that just the share of workers, I think people generally are unaware of just how deep and entrenched the gig economy works. My colleague, Danielle Goldfarb, our head of research, really has taught me a lot about this. And so often gig economy workers, they're reporting that they do not have access to paid sick leave if they are sick, and thus unable to work. So it affects their condition. And this makes sense of the reported data across North America, just revealing the deep-seated challenges of putting physical distancing into full effect. Again, as these new policies unfold that help temporary workers during these times economically, we may see a change. Want to move to India for a second, which just in the past 2 days after the implementation of the 21-day official lockdown, there is very significant reporting of physical distancing taking place as compared to other countries. We will be monitoring these data over the course of the lockdown. We need, of course, to be sensitive to the fact that these are RIWI responders in India who are internet enabled. They're more attuned to the news, and other contextual factors may be at play, but we hope to add in new queries and greater reach to examine what is going on the ground in India more. This is about 3,500 responders in India over a couple days. We hope to get more high frequency data. Expectations of healthcare system quality. So thank you, as noted in the very generous introduction. We work with many multilaterals and health system leaders around the world to collect data on health system resilience. This slide notes a paper that was led by Harvard researchers leveraging our technology in 12 low to middle income countries and reaching 18,000 respondents. So as we know from the patient hospital satisfaction literature here in Ontario, much of which has been led by academics at IHPME at the University of Toronto, and also from this work in this journal article, PLOS from Harvard, expectations of care impact post-care expectations of quality. And I personally speculate that the same holds true in a pandemic. This then creates another caveat we need to impose on all our sentiment data. We have certain levels of expectation of the healthcare system in Canada, the United States, which are high compared to healthcare system expectations elsewhere in the world. Raising expectations can drive health system improvement and resilience, as this PLOS paper shows. At the same time, high expectations can lead to a lowering of trust in our public officials and public leaders if they breach that trust, especially if they communicate poorly or if their communications are contradictory or non-evidence-based. And a further complication is that expectations are difficult to maintain in the face of well-publicized equipment supply and personnel shortages. So Governor Cuomo of New York, for example, has spoken with great passion and consistency and clarity about New York hospitals needing to share one ventilator among 3 patients. 32,000 new ventilators are ostensibly needed in New York State. So he's being honest and clear and a real leader, and there's significant research from the business and management leadership research that honesty and transparency during crises generates group trust and leadership trust. At the same time, it can unsettle people. So transparency is a two-edged sword. We'll have to see what effect it has on sentiment in different regions. On this slide, this is a quote that it's sort of gone viral from John Ioannidis, the epidemiologist at Stanford, and he talks about what really is core to RIWI, this idea that we have enormous data gaps around high frequency real-time random sampling of the population, whether that's for understanding the frequency of testing at an individual level, at a family level, or any number of other important data gaps right now. And reliable random sampling data collected on a high frequency continuous basis are just vital and difficult to obtain when the situation changes in real time. So this is the promise upon which RIWI was built, and among many other things, and I can get to example potential use cases. So, you know, for example, there are real challenges that are ahead of us in this crisis, and there are possibilities we have to get, you know, we have the possibility that we can get ahead of them with these kind of data. We can predict, track infection rates at national and subnational and city levels, and even more granular than that using our technology and those of others with which we can partner. We can more effectively target public health messaging, as we did during H1N1, to understand the effectiveness of those messages, targeting hidden voices, quiet voices, and we can A/B message test public health messages rapidly in areas of emerging or growing concern. And we could measure this on a daily basis, the full range of emotional, social, and economic implications over the next 2, 6, 12, 18 months and beyond, so that policy leaders will have the continuous data that they need for effective policy calls. So in conclusion, before we get to comments and questions, I'd just like to end on sort of a personal observational note. You know, we are in a new information environment in this pandemic. People talk to each other in echo chambers that need to be transcended. People self-select which media they watch and have cut their cable cords. People are more partisan and prone to anger and unleashing that anger online. Therefore, we need technology tools that melt away the anger and hear from quiet voices whose opinions are salient and vital. The term pandemic, I was taught again by a colleague at Della Lana, it comes from the Greek pandemos, or the fusion of the words common and public. So the way we at RIWI and our partners at the University of Toronto work, where we're under a long-term agreement, is by gathering opinion data across borders, across communities, by listening to these quiet voices and reporting on what they are saying and observing and why. So thank you for your time and your engagement. And I now open it up to questions, and I'll invite Sarah and Monica to select any questions, to which I'll do the best that I can to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil, for that extremely timely and fascinating presentation with data collected as early as yesterday. I've never seen such a thing. So I'm really excited to open up to questions. I'm sure there will be many. And please join us for our next one, probably in a month. Stay tuned and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.